What happens when a young woman, scarred by a tragic accident, is thrust into a world where technology controls fate? Cynthia, a determined survivor, struggles to overcome rejection, prejudice, and the haunting memories of her past. But when a mysterious opportunity promises to change everything, she must risk it all: her humanity, her family, and her dreams. Will she rise above the challenges and rewrite her destiny, or will the shadows of her past pull her down? This is a story of resilience, ambition, and the fight for a future in a world divided by technology and humanity. But before starting this story, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment that from which part of the world you watching me. Let's start.
Cynthia started her morning the way she always did, by carefully putting her artificial eye back into its socket. The process was simpler than most would think: clean the eye, clean the socket, and press it in gently. But simple didn't mean it was comfortable. The artificial eye was lightweight, and she had already applied a numbing agent along its edges and inside the rubbery surface. Still, peeling her eyelids back with one hand while guiding the eye into place with the other always made her feel a little sick. What she hated most was cleaning the socket itself. Cynthia could never quite tell how deep her finger went as she cleaned it, even when looking in the mirror with her real eye. The sensation was hard to describe: an itchy, crawling feeling that made her shudder. It felt like her finger was burrowing into the socket, wriggling around like a worm tunneling through an apple. Even after 4 years of doing this daily, it still left her dizzy and disoriented. Once the cleaning was done, a quick numbing sensation spread along the rim of the socket. That part was manageable, predictable, and tolerable. But what came next wasn't. Most of her cybernetics were easier to manage. Her artificial arm and leg connected seamlessly to her nervous system without even needing to break the skin. Once they were secured in place, they detected her neural signals, and as long as there were no issues, they worked perfectly. The only surgery she needed for them was a spinal implant. It helped translate her brain signals into machine-readable code for the prosthetics and ensured they connected only to her nervous system. This also prevented her from accidentally causing someone else to feel phantom pain if she shook their hand. Even her intestinal implant, which required more maintenance than she could keep track of, was relatively straightforward. It sat quietly with the rest of her remaining intestines, and most days, Cynthia forgot it was even there, except for the part where she had to check its diagnostics every morning. Her artificial eye, however, was a whole different story. Visual information was much more complicated than sending a simple command to flex a finger. Unlike her other prosthetics, which only received signals from her brain, the eye had to send signals back and forth. To make this work, an internal implant had been placed between her brain and the space where her eye used to be. It was tangled up in her ocular nerves, a delicate and tricky setup. Turning on the connection felt like setting off fireworks inside her skull. A sharp bolt of electricity surged through her synapses, the highest voltage legally allowed to zap neurons. But the worst part wasn't the initial jolt, it was the dull headache that always followed. The pain would bloom in her brain like thunder rumbling after a lightning strike. The intensity and timing of these headaches were unpredictable. Sometimes the ache hit within seconds of activating the eye and lasted only a few minutes. Other times it waited half an hour to start and lingered for hours. The doctors called it neural synchronous dissonance. It was a complicated way of saying that her brain needed time to adjust to having an eye again. Her brain didn't appreciate the sudden change, and it threw a tantrum every time until, at some point, it seemed to shrug and go, "Oh, right, this is normal now," and let her get on with her day. Once the initial shock subsided and she could feel steady on her legs again, Cynthia got up to prepare for the day ahead. She checked the digital display on her ocular implant, ensuring it could connect to her intestinal implant. This way, if there were any anomalies, she could detect them immediately in case of an emergency. There weren't many people waiting in the clinic when Cynthia arrived. A few individuals were scattered across the seats, making sure not to sit next to anyone if they could help it. As she walked past a parent struggling to entertain their children, one of the kids pointed at her and asked, "Mom, why is she wearing all that?" The mother quickly hushed the child and scolded them for pointing in public. But once she thought Cynthia was out of earshot, she quietly whispered, "Don't point at a crone junkie. You never want to upset those kinds of people." Cynthia heard every word, but she said nothing. What could she say? "Hi, random kid. I'm not using these cybernetics to push my body to the extreme or to get high on dopamine spinal injectors. Actually, I'm using them because sometimes my body turns against me, eating away at my internal organs and rejecting all synthetic tissue. I can't even get transplants. Oh, and paper cuts could give me gangrene, so I'm probably going to need another amputation soon. But if she had to explain all of that every time someone whispered about her or pointed at her, her life would just be one long lecture. A seminar on her entire medical history, reduced to a bullet point list. So she simply kept walking to the automated reception desk. She extended her prosthetic arm, palm up, to let the desk scan her bio ID embedded in her hand. After a moment of waiting, the scanner chirped in its usual, annoyingly cheerful tone, "I'm sorry, but this desk no longer supports Class 2 bio identifiers. Would you like to schedule an upgrade to Class 4 as part of your appointment?" "No." "Are you sure?" "It's a state-of-the-art procedure that injects your ID into your bloodstream and attaches it to your nanites, combining your bio ID and medical records for more convenience and a stress-free experience." "No." Cynthia's voice cut through the desk's pre-recorded message, causing the automated system to buzz with frustration. It paused for a moment before asking again, "Are you sure?" "It's a free procedure." I said no. She didn't raise her voice, but she could feel the weight of the other people's stares digging into her back. More whirring sounds followed. "I'm sorry, but check-ins are not possible through this desk without at least a Class 3 bio ID. Would you like to speak with an in-person representative?" "Yes, please." It took quite a few minutes for her request to be processed. By now, a small line had started to form behind her. The other desk was out of service, and the one she was using wasn't allowing anyone else to check in until it resolved her issue. "I'm sorry," Cynthia said quietly. "I'd let you skip me if I could." No one in the waiting room would look her in the eye, though none of them stopped staring. At last, a real voice buzzed from the desk. "Can I help you?" "Yes, I need to check in, but my bio ID isn't being accepted at this desk anymore." "What class is your ID?" "2, but I." "Well, that's your problem. You need to schedule an upgrade with this appointment." It was getting harder for Cynthia to keep her voice steady. "I'm well aware of what you want me to do, but medically speaking, I can't. It would be much easier if someone could come out here to read my ID, or if there was a way to send the info over." A low buzz, masking the worker's sigh, came through the speaker. "All right, ma'am. If you know your serial number, I can check if we have you in our past records." Cynthia quickly recited her serial number, and the speaker turned off. After a few minutes and more people joining the line behind her, the worker responded in a completely different tone. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We'll make sure to adapt our desk for these types of issues in the future. I've checked you in manually, and your physician is already available for your appointment. Please step through the door to your right." The door to the rest of the clinic clicked and hummed with an electronic sound, swinging open automatically. Cynthia quickly moved out of the way of the others waiting in line. As she walked down the hall towards her appointment, just before the door clicked shut, she heard someone mutter, "What a lazy bitch." She wanted to scream. The office where her appointment was held was stark and minimalist, leaving her with nothing to distract her. No pictures to focus on, no diplomas to read over and over, not even an uplifting poster to glance at while avoiding eye contact. The doctor who owned the office seemed just as detached. She barely acknowledged Cynthia as she entered, continuing to sort through files on her computer. Even the nurse who had handled her physical was more friendly, but Cynthia just waited with a practiced smile. All she had to do was get the doctor's signature, confirming she had passed her medical screening and was cleared for off-world deployment. What would it be like for Cynthia to work on a distant alien world? Would the strangest thing about her simply be that she was human? "You understand your chances are low, right?" the doctor finally spoke, not looking up from her computer screen. "I'm sorry," Cynthia snapped, snapping her attention back. "Do you understand that you're unlikely to ever get hired? Yes or no?" It's a simple question. "I understand that, yes." "And you understand the complications your condition brings to any team you might even qualify for?" Cynthia had to fight to keep her real eye from twitching. "Yes, I think I know the challenges by now, after living with them for a decade. I'd say I understand that better than anyone." That was the doctor's only response, a half-hearted acknowledgement. "I've noticed a discrepancy in your records. I see the dates of your amputations and intestinal surgeries, but I don't find anything about your replaced eye. Is there a reason for its omission?" "Not intentionally, no. But it was done with a private company, and all checkups are handled by them. It was a constant hassle. having to go to that specific business for screenings of her ocular implant instead of being able to get it checked anywhere else along with everything else. But there wasn't much she could do about it. Even though it was embedded in her optic nerves and skull, the implant wasn't technically hers. It was still considered proprietary technology and experimental at that. It was on loan to her until her contract expired, after which she could finally claim ownership of it. Until then, part of her body just inches from her brain wasn't truly hers. It was an unsettling feeling, one that literally weighed on her mind. And the reason for the implant in the first place, the doctor asked, her face showing an odd dissatisfaction. I see the unprecedented allergic reaction you had to medbots that caused your other surgeries. Was this for something similar? No. The doctor waited. Care to elaborate. Is there a reason this is turning into a discussion? I thought this was supposed to be just a physical. It is, and it can stay that way if that's all you want from this visit. But after reviewing your history, I don't think a simple physical is enough to clear you for space travel. None of the other doctors I've gotten recommendations from required anything more than a physical. And have those doctors' signatures, of which I see you've collected nearly a dozen, gotten you any closer to securing a programming position off Earth? What would you suggest then? I suggest you prove to me that you're not only physically capable of working off-world, but that you're also mentally prepared for the transition. A psych evaluation? I already cleared one of those. I see that, but I also see it only covered basic questions, checking whether you would be negatively impacted just by living in space. It was about identifying any fears or subconscious issues that might make you unsuitable for orbital life. The doctor rushed through her explanation, as though dismissing it as unimportant or done by someone less qualified. That's not what I think is missing. And what do you think is missing, exactly? Any real evidence that you fully understand the dangers you'll face living off Earth, dangers that you, and almost only you, will be dealing with. I've done extensive research. I see no proof of that. I see certifications in spatial computing, AI engineering, quantum mechanics, and several other technical fields I haven't even heard of before. But nowhere in your essays or evaluations do I see you mention that you're aware there isn't a single station out there equipped to handle your medical needs. Cynthia sighed. So, this was about worrying over her medical care. Medbots, tiny machines the size of blood cells, had become the go-to cure all in medicine over the last century. They were the only kind of medical care available on most off-world stations. Once injected, these little nanites could target health issues with precision. They could synthesize medicines in exact dosages, apply them to problem areas, and even replicate tissue cells. With enough doses, they could regrow bones, organs, or even entire limbs. Medbots were essentially a supercharged immune system, able to 3D print anything the body needed. For most people's needs, anyway. But Cynthia already knew all of that, and she didn't care. I'm more than willing to sign the necessary waivers for any company that hires me. I don't see why that needs to be evaluated. Less than 1,000, the doctor interrupted. What? That's how many people are documented with your condition. Less than 1,000. Think about that number for a moment. Let it settle in. Across our planet's population of over 13 billion people, and the 2 billion or so living off-world, there are less than 1,000 people known to have your allergy. She leaned forward. Can you guess where they all are? Here, Cynthia replied. Earth. Here and safe. Here and looked after. Here. But not out there. You're an anomaly so poorly understood that the few who study it can't even agree on how to categorize it. They can't be sure if it's the same issue for everyone, or if it's several different problems rejecting the medbots. Okay, so what? You think I don't already know this? I've had to stay informed about it since grade school. That brings me to my point, Miss Havoc. From what I understand, your first incident with medbots happened before you even hit puberty. That's not in my records. You were 10. You weren't even a preteen yet. The cellular damage you suffered from that incident had a lasting impact on your life, and it was probably the most painful experience you've ever had. And according to these surgery dates, the doctor tapped the side of her computer monitor for emphasis. It's happened to you twice. I don't need a reminder. Even now, on particularly bad days, Cynthia still had nightmares about that first time. Her mother had taken her to the hospital after Cynthia crashed her bicycle downhill and broke her fall by smashing her arm into a fire hydrant. Cynthia was able to skip past the line because her mother had friends in the hospital's administration. A nurse had given her a lollipop after the injection was done, but Cynthia hadn't been able to bring herself to taste it. Her throat felt full of bile, and her arm was on fire, writhing in pain beneath her skin. "Big girls don't cry," the nurse had said. "Big girls don't make a fuss." It wasn't until Cynthia's arm began to convulse and spasm that the nurse finally took her seriously. She remembered flailing her arm as it flared in pain, her vision hazy from the fever and her tears. The loud, chaotic voices of the medical staff as they held her down for the anesthetic, everything fading except for the low hum of a machine she couldn't see. The machine warmed up before it seared her bone off from her shoulder. The second time was a few years later, after she'd already gotten used to her prosthetic arm and the implant that had partially replaced the intestines that atrophied from the first injection. Apparently, the medbots had detected a gastrointestinal issue and tried to drift over to her stomach lining before the doctors deactivated them and flushed them out. But hey, at least she learned she had IBS. She never had nightmares about the second time, mostly because she was unconscious for the painful part. The only thing she really remembered was an afternoon jog after practice and a loose patch of soil she noticed too late. That, and the very apologetic paramedic who she woke up to hovering over her hospital bed, tearfully explaining to Cynthia that he hadn't thought to check her bio ID before administering the shot. At that point, her leg had already been amputated a long time ago. But, hey, at least a new law came out of the incident, along with a rather sizable settlement to help pay off her medical bills and new prosthetic. But none of Cynthia's feelings about any of that were this doctor's business. Are we nearing the end of this interrogation? I do have a life outside of your constant questioning, believe it or not. You taking this lightly doesn't ease my concerns that you haven't done proper research or truly understand. 3 of them. I'm sorry. There are 3 documented cases similar to mine off-world. Of the less than 1,003 are known to be off-Earth. One of them is the child of an ambassador working for the Conjunction of Planets. That ambassador is currently working to make peace with a sapient species that's been forced to live in makeshift subterranean cities after the American government used chemical warfare to deoxidize their planet's atmosphere. For once, the doctor looked slightly taken aback. I didn't know that. I stand corrected. But I don't see how that child's situation is relevant to yours. I'm not finished. Even though the space race that led to that incident has been under control for decades, that planet's surface is still severely damaged and will remain so for generations. The relationship between that planet and ours? Rightfully strained. But that ambassador's child? He's fully supported medically on that planet at no cost. Last I heard, he's currently an architect, designing better infrastructure for them. His work is highly praised there. Think about that for a moment. Let it sink in. A child of one of the people responsible for destroying their civilization is supported without question. Cynthia leaned in close to the doctor's desk, deliberately letting the tip of her spinal implant peek out from the collar of her shirt. What does that say about our species that is unwilling to accommodate me? What I seem to be missing isn't a grasp of my situation, but rather the empathy from my fellow humans and the government. This left the doctor momentarily speechless. Is he equipped with cybernetic enhancements? Why does that matter? It's significant. It influences how his worth is assessed on that planet. All right then. This chat has been interesting, but I refuse to engage in a discussion about the worth of a human life with a physician. If securing your signature requires this kind of conversation, you can keep it. I think I'm finished here. Why did you choose to have your eye taken out? Excuse me. The private company associated with that implant doesn't develop cybernetics for medical purposes. They solely invest in enhancements for human augmentation. Given your allergy, you won't be able to regenerate lost organs if you decide to reverse the implant later. What exactly were you hoping to enhance about yourself that justified the permanent loss of an eye